Gears now to what is going to be the larger part of this week and next week's information. Things that are going to lead us into basically what's going to wrap up our semester with the Civil War. But in order to get to that Civil War, we have to know exactly what caused it. And of course, it's been building throughout this whole semester, and it's going to come to a head, as you're going to see here within the next few pages of your book and next few slides. So, leading it off. Um, Basically, what you need to know is the cause of the Civil War basically gets set in motion by the Mexican Cession in 1848. Because those lands, whenever we acquire those lands, of course, it is more territory than Louisiana territory from the Louisiana Purchase. Those lands, it's going to be a huge question. Do we allow slavery there? Do we not allow slavery there? What are we looking at doing with this? Okay, so politicians initially try to kick the can down the road and refuse to touch this slavery issue because they think it's going to divide the nation. And they're going to lose votes and constituents no matter which way that they decide or which stance they decide to take. So, in 1848, there's going to be a new president. As President James K. Polk is not in the best of health, he decides he's not going to run, and therefore they're going to need a new nominee for both parties and see which direction the country's going to go. The guy that's going to wind up winning it is going to be a guy named Zachary Taylor, who we talked a little bit about a couple of weeks ago, being a Mexican-American war hero. He is going to win the election despite having no political experience whatsoever. Again, he is a general. He had helped win this war out in California and vowed that whenever he comes into office, he's like, I'm going to serve one term, and as soon as that term is over, I'm going to try to step aside. He's going to also take no official stance on slavery, and he's going to basically just punt it to the next president. So what's going to happen with that? In terms of the states that we get with the Mexican Cession, you're going to have California, of course, being the largest in terms of land. It's going to soon become the largest in terms of population. Okay, so in 1848, in a creek in western California, there's going to be some gold spotted. And whenever people or this guy looks out across this creek, he sees nothing but gold for as far as the eye can see. And word gets out about this creek of gold, and this is going to start the gold rush of 1849, which of course is San Francisco 49ers football team named after this event. But anyway, a lot of people flock out to California in 1849 with get-rich-quick schemes in terms of finding gold and what they're going to do with the gold. However, most of the wealth actually that finds its way into California comes from people that were there to support the people trying to pan for gold. Okay, so you're going to have multiple businesses come out there. You're going to have banking. You're going to have restaurants, housing, so on and so forth. Those people are going to be the ones to get rich quick. Okay, now California is going to quickly acquire the number of people needed for statehood. They are going to apply for statehood as a free state. However, they are still going to take in Native Americans and buy and sell them as slaves. So anyway, but in terms of African slaves, they are not going to apply for statehood and ask for permission to have African slaves. Okay, this is going to throw off the balance that they had had for a number of years between free states and slave states. And because of this, there's no state that they can look at that's also coming in at this point in time where they could say, okay, California can be the free state, this can be the slave state, because what Congress has done is they have created something to where popular sovereignty has to be the way of the land in terms of states choosing, which one they're going to have, or they're going to be free or slave. Okay, so in terms of sectional balance, Zachary Taylor is actually going to be a Southerner who is, of course, now the president, but he is from Virginia. Actually winds up getting buried in Kentucky. More on that later on. But anyway, at this point in time, the House of Representatives is anti-slave. The Senate is going to be balanced 50-50. They could block any abolition efforts that will try to come out of the House of Representatives. However, the South is going to feel that they are being attacked due to the political environment in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that the Supreme Court is majority Southern, the President is Southern, the House of Representatives may be anti-slavery, but the Senate is going to be 50-50. South still feels slighted by this. Now, the rest of the South. are going to include, in terms of threats that they're going to feel towards slavery and their way of life, the prospect of California coming in as a state that is free and throwing off that 50-50 balance that they had in terms of free states and slave states. You're going to have Northerners pushing for abolition. That's also going to threaten Southern efforts, which we've talked a lot about the abolition movement. You're also going to have this fugitive slave law, which is actually designed to help the South, but the way it is enforced or not enforced actually benefits the North, and it calls into question tactics the South is using to try to keep slaves. Okay, so what this law did is it called for runaway slaves to be returned to the South. Many in the North are going to refuse to do this. Okay, so enforcement officials in the North, if they do see a potential runaway slave, they basically are just like, I'm not going to bother trying to catch them. So anyway, what this also is going to do is it's going to lead a healthy environment for people to run away from their life as a slave and still try to escape to the North. Of course, they did this along something called the Underground Railroad. Underground Railroad, of course, being a series of stops along a line from the south into the north. If you ever get the chance, go to the Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati. Kind of eye-opening how many people crossed over the Ohio River and fled into the north through Ohio. But anyway, along this Underground Railroad, basically you would look for certain signs that would show that this is a safe house for people trying to escape slavery throughout the South. And of course, people were taken from station to station, then eventually into the North. The most famous conductor, quote-unquote conductor, along this Underground Railroad is going to be Harriet Tubman, a freed slave herself. And she's going to be taking 19 trips into the South, helping to free 300 plus slaves. Okay, and actually, she is the one that they are contemplating replacing Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill with. Okay, so anyway, with everything going in the climate at this point in time, you have multiple people running away from slavery. You have politics in Washington set up the way they were. You realize there's going to need to be political compromise that prevents war or staves off the wars that is, or sorry, the war that is looming. Okay, so anyway, in the Senate, you actually have a couple of political careers winding down, and the architects of those compromises that are nearing the end of their political careers. Okay, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John C. Calhoun are going to try to help iron out the conflicts over slavery that people had in Washington, D.C., despite the fact those three men have very different political beliefs. Okay, Henry Clay is obviously going to urge both sides to meet in the middle on slavery. However, Daniel Webster is going to urge the North to give to the South on some issues, but not others. So in other words, they're both wanting to compromise. And Calhoun is actually going to start taking more of a pro-states' rights stance and calling for slavery to be left alone. Okay. While these guys are willing to compromise on these issues, the thing that is going to complicate this issue is going to be the fact that President Taylor is going to veto any compromises, despite the fact he does not have a straight, hard line on slavery, pro or anti. But anyway, he, for whatever reason, had stated that any slavery issue that came to his desk that was not decisively pro-slavery or anti-slavery, he was going to veto. Now, this gets a little more clarity after a long July 4th weekend in 1850, whenever Zachary Taylor actually is going to consume a large amount of cherries and ice-cold milk and contract some sort of intestinal complication that winds up killing him on July 9th of that year. Okay, Millard Fillmore is then going to become president of the United States. Okay, Millard Fillmore is going to actually encourage people to compromise on this issue, even if it means that they're just kicking the issue down the road. So, Clay is going to help craft the Compromise of 1850. This is one of his last dealings in the Senate because he actually dies shortly after this is created. The South is going to the South is going to get popular sovereignty guaranteed for all the new states in the Mexican cession lands. Texas in particular is going to get $10 million for lands that they have to hand over to New Mexico to split up territory that originally was part of Texas. There's also going to be a new fugitive slave law that's going to be enforced by people in the North that guarantees that any slave that is caught is not going to have a trial. They're just going to be returned back to the South. You also now start to see a $10 bounty for returned slaves. And officials are actually going to have to take in runaways despite political beliefs. Okay? Now, what this means is if you were an official and you saw a runaway slave, you had the duty to go ahead and take that person and place them under arrest so that way they could be taken back to the South regardless of the political belief. Otherwise, they could be punished. Okay? Now, the North is also going to get out of this some key things. The first thing being that California is going to be a free state, or be a free state. Slave trading in Washington, D.C. is going to be banned. Even though it was largely unpracticed there, you still are going to have Washington, D.C., since it is part of the South, be a largely pro-slavery city. This is going to be seen as a way to deal a blow to this. Okay? Now, also at this point in time, we're going to see the end of the Whig Party. Okay? Now, Millard Fillmore, while he finishes out Zachary Taylor's term, he is not going to be reelected as president, as Franklin Pierce, a Democrat, is going to be elected president in 1852. This happens as Whigs cannot agree on a platform or a candidate. This is going to be a strict split between the North and the South. They also don't have their compromiser, Henry Clay, to bring them all together, as he is now passed away. But anyway, throughout the campaign, both candidates on both sides refuse to touch the issue of slavery because they know if they say anything about abolition, they're going to lose half their voters. And if they say anything about keeping slavery as it was, they're going to lose half their voters as well. Okay, now, the Whig Party is going to be essentially crushed and is never going to play a major role in national politics ever again as a result of this election. Okay, very soon after that, we had talked about Kansas and Nebraska, both territories just to the west of Missouri. There's going to be a proposal that at this point in time to build something called the Transcontinental Railroad, which does eventually see railroad networks that are going to connect the East Coast all the way out to the West Coast. Now, if you remember back to the Missouri Compromise, slavery had been banned north of the 3640, I believe, parallel, which is the southern border of Missouri that it shares with Arkansas. Anything north of that was not allowed to have slavery. That line extended all the way out west until you get to, I believe, the eastern border of California and Arizona and Colorado. No, sorry, messing my states up here. It'd be California, Nevada, and Arizona. Okay, so that line extends from southern Missouri all the way out there. Well, just so happens that there's talk about building this transcontinental railroad, which eventually is going to be completed. We'll talk more about it here in a couple of chapters. But originally that railroad was planned a little bit further south than what it winds up being. Okay, the North wants to try to get this railroad to have major ports and terminals in the North. A guy that is going to lead the efforts to do that is going to be named Stephen Douglas, okay, who is a senator from the state of Illinois who actually won that Senate seat over Abraham Lincoln. Okay, now, he wants to have this railroad hub actually lead all the way up into Chicago to help Chicago become a major trading port. But anyway, whenever he demands this happen, and he actually blocks the process of building the railroad, Southerners are going to become angry and they're going to refuse to agree to do this unless they get something in return for losing the railroad. Okay, well, a deal is brokered within the Kansas-Nebraska Act, in which the railroad hub is going to move to the north. The South is going to get both Kansas and Nebraska that are going to be organized as territories to become states, and both of those states are going to vote on whether or not they want slavery, whereas in the past it had been banned there, okay, thanks to the Missouri Compromise. But now, all of a sudden, you're going to have people looking to have a vote on whether or not slavery should come into those states. Okay, this essentially overturns the Missouri Compromise and rules that this is null and void, which does reopen the issue of slavery in the North in places they thought it was going to be banned. Okay, now this action is seen as legislation that basically brokers the Civil War because it does help to erase the Missouri Compromise. It helps to divide the North and the South. The fugitive slave law is going to be left to Northerners to enforce, which they are going to reluctantly do. for some part, and then Democrats are also going to become split over slavery, to the point where they're actually going to have two different parties within the Democratic Party, and they're going to have a northern candidate and a southern candidate in the next election. Okay, this is going to lead to the birth of the Republican Party, who wants to end slavery. Okay, of course, the Republicans, their primary platform is ending slavery. Their first major candidate is Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln actually does not believe in ending all slavery at that point in time. Okay, he is for gradual emancipation, but he has some very interesting comments that he makes in terms of who he wants to free and who he wants to keep enslaved. Okay, so that is going to conclude part one of Causes of the Civil War. So we now have the legislation in place. Next time we'll actually add a legal precedent and talk about a few more things.